All right, Jim, come on over. See over there? I'm Jay Follis, the marketing director here at the Gilmore Car Museum. Want to welcome you here. It's first time here, right? Well, let's, we have to fill up with gas real quick, but we'll give you a quick little ride around. You kind of give an overview of what the museum's all about. If you've never been here before, we're on 90 acres. It's a little different than what you're probably anticipating. A lot of people expect to see 120 cars or so in one big building, one barn. We have 9 historic barns out here, and of course our gas station. And of course our gas station has clean restrooms, so as we're driving around, if you need them, you just let me know, okay? Let's get this filled up and on the road. All right, Jim, well, you've seen our gas station here. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little ride around. You can kind of get an idea of our grounds out here and get a sense of what the Gilmore Car Museum is all about. Like I said, we're on 90 acres, and all the barns out here have a historical significance for the most part. This barn here that you're looking at on the left-hand side is the Pierce Arrow Society's museum. The foundation set up a museum here, and actually they're going to be breaking ground here shortly. That's their museum. This big barn over here actually houses a large Hudson exhibit, the Eldon Hotseller collection. We've borrowed about 22 of his cars. They're in there, as well as cars built here in Kalamazoo, early gas, steam, and electric cars. These 3 barns that you see down here were originally just used as storage and utility buildings, and because we now have 230 cars or so in the combined collections, instead of putting those cars just in storage, we display them. So these barns out here now are all displays. The 2 older barns are original to the property, along with the house that's up there. Those have cars from the brass era. And the large building here, as I drive off the road, the large buildings up here have cars, more your muscle cars, Corvettes, the DeLoreans in there. That's the type of stuff that we've got down here on display. The museum actually started just as the hobby of one man. Donald Gilmore was chairman of Upjohn Corporation, and today that's part of Pfizer. But in 1963, he was chairman of Upjohn Corporation, and his wife purchased him a 1920 Pierce Arrow project car. And that's what really got him hooked into the antique cars, and he started restoring that car in the driveway. But we're going to park this here for a minute. We'll hop out and check out a couple of these different exhibit barns so you can see the different cars that are inside the barns. Then we'll come out and go for a little ride again. Well, this is our 1966 Snowmobile set. Walt Disney was a friend of Donald Gilmore, and this is the back seat of a 1930 Rolls-Royce. And I've got a couple volunteers here to show us how large the back seat really is. Richard and Evelyn. And now, Richard and Evelyn, where are you guys from, you said?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence, Rhode Island. First time to the car museum, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, why don't you hop up here. Now, we have people ask us all the time, how large is this movie set? And I used to tell them it was 3 times larger than life, and people would always question that. And I recently had a magazine question that. So I went through and I measured the doors and I measured the seat. And parts of it are 2 times larger, parts of it are 3 times larger. The seat cushion is about 6 times larger than life. So now I've just gotten to the point where I say, hey, it's Walt Disney. You know, anything Disney made was not based on reality, so it's larger than life. The movie was the Snowmobile. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but it was classic Disney film. The detail in this model, this mock-up, is astounding. I mean, obviously your seats are quite well done, but if you look at all the little details, the hand straps up here, even the ashtrays up here have the little tin in them, the woodwork, and we'll show you the car in a minute here. You can get a good look at the back seat of the car. But today we do this with all digital, equipment. Back then they actually made this huge set. And what happened, it was Donald Gilmore knew Walt Disney, and when they're making the film, he asked him, could he purchase the 1930 Rolls-Royce that they're using? And Walt Disney said, well, certainly. And so Walt Disney said, I have a semi coming with the car and a couple pieces from the movie. And this is what showed up, this big back seat. Over here we have the 1930 Rolls-Royce, which is the same as the mock-up that's over here. I'll show you the back seat, and then you can compare with the back seat of what the car actually looks like. Well, you can really see the detail once you're inside here looking at the real car. You can really see the detail compared to what the Disney set designers did to make that set piece really look the part. I mean, the woodworking, the ashtrays, the handles. Everything about it they really have duplicated quite well. Well, the Rolls-Royce here is in the Rolls-Royce Barn here at the Car Museum. And as you can see, all the cars in here are Rolls-Royces except for this one. This one's a 1929 Bentley, of course, built by Rolls-Royce. 1929 Bentley Speedster. It's a racer. A very nice car. Of course, over here we also have a Springfield Rolls. Springfield is kind of unique because it was built in Springfield, Massachusetts, where everybody thinks of Rolls-Royce as only being built in England. And this one actually was built here in the United States. This one has a stainless steel up on the body portion. That's something that people think of when they think of DeLorean. Well, we have a few more Rolls-Royces in here to look at. Actually, we have a lot of ground to cover, so I just want to show you some of the highlights here. This particular Rolls-Royce is very unique. It's actually designed after 1911 Rolls-Royce. It was custom built for the Maharaji, and Donald Gilmore wanted to purchase the car, and the person would not sell it, and the royal family did not want a duplicate made, but Donald Gilmore went out and purchased another Rolls-Royce and had the bodyworks pretty much duplicated to match the one that the Maharaji had owned. So this one's a duplicate of a 1911, one of a kind, and this one's just the duplicate of it. Actually, if you want, why don't we head on across and take a look at our gas station. Well, usually the gas station is the first stop for folks at the museum. This actually operates as kind of our welcome center, especially during car shows and stuff. This gas station is a 1930s replica, and what's really interesting about it is we actually were donated blueprints, 1928 blueprints, and that's pretty much what they designed the gas station from. And people are always curious of how we decided to make it a Shell station. And what happened is while the gas station was being built, a gentleman contacted us and asked us what kind of gas station it was going to be. And at the time we just decided it was going to be a general gas station. We hadn't decided it was going to be anything. And he said, well, I collect a lot of Shell memorabilia, so if you're interested, I'd be happy to supply you with some Shell memorabilia. And so just about all the Shell stuff you see here came from one collection, and that was Dick Walters, or Walter Demick. And Walter Demick is the nation's largest Shell distributor. And so it's kind of nice that he had one of the largest Shell collections, and he's also a Shell distributor, one of the largest in the nation. And he's fairly local, lives about a couple hours away from us. We even have our 1950 Ford pickup in there that's got painted in Shell colors with the Shell decals. And the interesting thing that people say when they come here to the museum is with a gas station, when you walk in, it smells like a gas station, because we've got the old tools and the oily rags and stuff in there. It definitely smells like a gas station, and that's one thing that you can't capture on video. When we walk around inside the barns, we're going to notice that you smell the old wood and it smells like an old barn. Not necessarily the hay and the straw and the animals, but you'll smell the wood, and you can just tell it's an old barn, not something new. Okay, well, I'll be right up, okay? Thanks. Well, we even have authentic cash register and things in here, and you kind of will notice that we had to raise our price of gas. We're now up to 19.5 cents. So sorry about that. This we'll start with the 1899, and this is the one that I always tell people you have to use two hands on. Because if you just use one hand, you're going to hit the goat that's in the road. The bad thing is you just let your hand off the tiller or the steering wheel when you grab this one. Then we go to 1910. Nice and loud, you can do that with one hand. 1930. Well, here we are in the Pierce Arrow Barn. Pierce Arrow Society has established their museum here at the Gilmore Car Museum. In fact, they're getting ready to build another building. Pierce Arrow has a really interesting history. During the Civil War, or after the Civil War, they started making bird cages. And then they started making ice boxes. And around the turn of the century, they got into making bicycles, which we have a 1905 bicycle here, boys' bicycle. They started making the motorcycles and cars, and they're probably best known today for their luxury cars. So we have the 1903 with tiller steering and a 1912 Pierce Arrow motorcycle, which is extremely rare. Next to that, the green one there, is a 1920 Pierce Arrow, and that's actually the Pierce Arrow that started the Gilmore Car Collection. That's the one that was given to Donald Gilmore as a gift, and they restored it out in their driveway. So this is the first car in the collection, how the collection actually got started. Now, like I said, the Pierce Arrow is very well known for its luxury cars. One of the trademarks that people will recognize is the headlight that flares into the fender. It was a popular trademark of their car. So far we've seen the Rolls-Royce Barn and we've seen the Pierce Arrow Barn. That means we've got 7 more barns to go. We got to keep moving then. Well, up here we have one of 2 of our hood ornament collections. And here at the Gilmore Car Museum we have one of the largest collections of hood ornaments on display anywhere in North America. We actually have a collection here in the Pierce Arrow building, and we also have one that is part of the Classic Car Club of America Museum. Most of these, well, a lot of them came off the cars themselves as the manufacturer would design them and make them. Here we have some early Hudson. You have Pierce Arrows down here, but then we have the ones that were custom made. Like here is a Lalique. It's a leaded crystal made in France. They're extremely rare, extremely valuable, and that would have been something that if you were driving let's say a Duesenberg or something that you had custom built for you, you might get a Lalique to help show your personality to the rest of the world. Some of these are very unique. There are some that, as the wind will go by them, different things function. Some of them light up. The Indian chief, this lights up from a Pontiac. Behind you here we have some airplanes which became very popular during the time of Lindbergh. And some of those, the propellers will spin. Some very unique ones in here. And of course we have our skull and crossbones, and his jaw would sit there and chatter as you go down the road. Yeah, it's a juvenile electric. So if you're a wealthy family, that's what you would have been able to purchase for your child. What a life, huh? These were cars in this section of this barn that were all built in Kalamazoo. People think of the checker cab, which is right there. They think of that, and they may think of Kalamazoo. Every checker cab was built here since 1922. They actually went out of business in 1982 building cars. All the rest of these cars, though, were built here. This 1920 Roamer was built here. Now, the Roamer here actually competed with Rolls-Royce. It was, I guess, the economical Rolls-Royce. One thing you'll notice about these early ones is they either had to slide through from the other side or they had to lose some weight. On our way over here to see the steam cars, I also should point out this is a 1903 Michigan, and this car was actually built here in Kalamazoo as well. It's kind of an interesting car. Obviously all these early cars got their start from either buggies or bicycle manufacturers, but this one had some very interesting people that were involved. Dr. Upjohn, who started Upjohn Corporation, which is now part of Pfizer, invested money into the Michigan, and he actually was the treasurer of the Michigan. Also had the Fuller brothers, who had Fuller Transmission, eventually became part of Eaton Corporation, were involved with this car, as well as the Blood brothers. And the Blood brothers built the Cornelian, which raced in the Indy 500 and actually ended up going to Allegan, which is another little community close to us, and had Blood brothers for years, which eventually was bought out by Rockwell International. So it's kind of an interesting history. 1903, 100-year-old car built here in Kalamazoo. We'll take a walk over here and look at some of these early gas steam electric cars. Here we have our 1903 Oldsmobile curved dash Olds, 100 years old. Actually is the car that really got everybody driving. While Ford is credited, I guess, with the assembly line, this is the car that actually got into mass production. Now when we talk about gas, steam, electric and these alternatives, you don't imagine that 100 years ago that we were talking about them. In fact, this one that we have in front of us here is the WMU, Western Michigan University's solar race car, and they just came in 5th with their newer model. This is their 1995 model. So this kind of brings this 100 years around so that you realize that we were talking about all these alternative fuels 100 years ago. This here is a 1912 Cadillac. What's really unique about it is it has electric lights, and it's the first with electric crank or electric start versus a crank start. This here is actually the oldest automobile that we have in our collection. It's an 1899 Locomobile. And the Locomobile in this vintage was steam. And this is a little steam car. And this is what you think of when you think of the horseless carriage. This car is built very much like a little buggy. It even has the leather front here and the place to rest your reins when you're done with your ride. Now this car is quite interesting because it came to Kalamazoo as the very first new car. It was shipped on a train in a crate, and when it got here to Kalamazoo, the local newspaper had articles about how all the young men and the storekeepers and the ladies from the town all had to come and check out this new fad, this horseless carriage. And they unpacked it, and the gentleman that purchased the car actually towed the car home with his horse, drove it just like a buggy. Now this is being as a steam car, it's not something you're going to hop in and start right up and drive off. You have to wait for that steam to heat up. And the gentleman that bought the car actually was kind of afraid of it. Maybe somewhat embarrassed. He took it home and put it in his barn, and he would not drive it anywhere. He would start it up. Once it got up to temperature, he'd pull it forward, then he'd back it up, pull it forward and back it up. And he did that in his barn several times, but he was afraid to take it out. He was afraid that he was either going to scare the horses or he'd kill himself or slam into somebody else. And he had told a few people that he'd love to see somebody else drive one, and if he could see somebody else driving one of these horseless carriages and he could get the sense that it was safe, maybe he'd keep it. Otherwise he wanted to get rid of it. Kind of thought it was a passing fad. Well, Dr. Upjohn, who started Upjohn Corporation, actually heard about it, so they go out to this gentleman's house in downtown Kalamazoo and asked to see the horseless carriage. And Dr. Upjohn had him heated up, and the gentleman told him the story about how he was afraid to drive it. Well, Dr. Upjohn asked him if he could drive it and hopped in and drove the car around the yard, had so much fun with the car that he actually purchased the car from the gentleman right there. So this is the very first new car and first used car that ever came to Kalamazoo. 1899 Locomobile. This is our 1903 Columbia Electric. And so over 100 years ago we were talking about alternative fuels. Actually it was a competition to see who could actually come out with the most pleasing vehicle for the masses. And apparently gas won out. While steam was very economical and efficient, steam didn't win. It was a gasoline. So here's a 1903, built just like a buggy. You'd swear you're in a buggy. It even has the leather top and the leather fenders with tiller steering. Now tiller steering is very similar to what we think of as a lot of lawnmowers today with tiller steering. And one disadvantage you have with this is if you have a little bit of a belly, you might have a hard time turning this tiller. You actually have to pick it up and around yourself. Now this one here is a Roush and Long. This is 1914. And this, the driver sits up front. The passengers get to ride in the back. This car, it reminds me of an early telephone booth. It's a big car with a lot of glass in the front. And of course it's electric. We have down here early steam-powered fire apparatus from the city of Kalamazoo, and 1927 Model T. And most people are going to say, wait a minute, Ford never made an electric Model T, and they're correct. This 1927 Model T was converted during World War II for Donald Gilmore so that he could save gas, so he wouldn't have to have gas ration. He had this car converted to electricity. If you take a peek inside here, you can see the big lever, forward and reverse. Well, down here we have the Hudson Collection. And this is Eldon Hodstadler Collection, and it's the 22 Hudsons. It's the largest exhibit any place in the world of Hudsons. We actually have about half of his collection down here today. Well, like I said, this is the Eldon Hodstadler Collection. Comes to us from Middlebury, Indiana. He has a collection of probably 45 or 50 Hudsons, and right now we have 22 of them on display here in the collection. And they start right here with a 1909, the very first year of Hudson Motors. And Hudson actually gets its name from D.L. Hudson, the same man that invested in the Hudson department stores. He invested into Hudson. The cars that are in this collection are extremely rare. They're very well maintained. They're either are all original or restored. This 1911 33 Speedster is extremely rare. This car here was built for the Puerto Rican market. And what a lot of these early car companies would do is they'd send a car out on a race, and it either would be an endurance race across the country or a speed race. And the whole idea was is if your car can make it through the race, you're going to get some great publicity. And so that's what they did. They built this car and shipped it to Puerto Rico just to race and let everybody know that the dealer there in Puerto Rico had Hudsons for sale. I love this because it has the bug screen on it and even your early goggles. Now the next one to me that's a huge highlight is this 1917 Shaw Racer. This actually has a Duesenberg chassis with a Hudson engine. I think they built 6 or 7 of these, I'm not exactly sure. But this car would travel well over 100 miles an hour, and this is what you would have saw it something like the Indy 500 back in 1917. Now there's so many cars in this exhibit alone. I think what I'll do is just go around and show you some of my favorites, give you a few of the highlights. I don't want to give it all away, but I'll show you a few that I think are really outstanding. This car is absolutely remarkable. This is one of my favorites in the Hudson exhibit. And part of that is because of the way it looked when it was found. This car was actually found in the Death Valley area. It was found in a mining camp in Eldon Hotstiller, the owner, actually had a bulldozer go up and make a road and tow this car down. And when you see that photo, to me, I can't imagine that he would look at it and say, we can bring that back. But they did. They completely rebuilt this car. It's a stunning example of an awesome restoration. And it's a neat car on top of just being a great restoration. Something I think that's fun with this car is that it's very wide. Being it's a 1942 Hudson, it would have had running boards. But on this one, there are running boards, but they're covered by the wood. And if you happen to notice, let me walk over here and open the door here, and maybe you'll be able to see that door pillar is sitting right on the running board. What this did is it made it that this car could actually seat more people by doing it that way. And it was a good thing because during World War II, a car like this would have had a higher gas ration sticker on the windshield because it could take more people. This 1940 business coupe is the perfect car for the young man. If you're a young man in high school, you could take your date out in this car and get home, and as soon as you got home, you could open up the trunk, pull out the pickup bed, and start your chores. Perfect car for the young man. Very unique. This vehicle is also very interesting. It was very popular. It's a 1937 Terraplane. But what makes this so interesting is actually a pickup truck. And this was a very popular pickup truck. It's done in an Art Deco styling with the 3 different colors of paint and a pickup bed that actually would hold a 4x8 sheet of plywood. Now we think of that as not being that big of a deal, but that's something that Ford and Chevy didn't offer until about 1953, and Hudson was that far ahead of them. Well, you're entering the Tucker Historical Collection Library. And what we did is we created an office that looks like 1948. Looks like it could be Preston Tucker's office or a sales office from one of the dealerships. And the Tucker automobile was built in 1948. Very revolutionary, had the 3 headlights. And we normally don't let people in here, but we'll let you in here just to get a quick glimpse. This holds the National Archives for the Tucker automobile. And so as you step in, you'll see some things that are original to the factory, original hood ornament. The little tiny wheel cover here was actually made by Phil Egan, who was a designer for the company. And they made it for a clay model, which is very similar to the one that we have here. That's actually a model that was made by the Franklin Mint when they were designing their model. But this hubcap would have been a hubcap on a wheel for their model. And Phil Egan asked me a couple years back, I've been using this as a paperweight for 50 years. Is it something you could use? So we said definitely, and we brought that along. Over here in the corner you see a wood die model, and that's actually original from the factory. Tile floors from the factory. The factory today is where they make Tootsie Rolls, and it's also part of it is Ford City Mall. It was in Chicago on Cicero Avenue and was the largest factory of its day. 475 acres for one factory. Now the Tucker, like I said, it was very revolutionary. They had about 2,200 dealers across the United States, and due to lack of funds and a big investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the company folded after building only 51 cars. Well, you probably wanted to see a Tucker, and so here you have Tucker number 47. This is the 47th Tucker ever built, and this is actually the lowest original mileage Tucker in existence. It has 35 miles on it. This car actually even has the original tires on it. That's why they're black walls and not white walls, because when the Tucker factory shut down during their investigation, several men came in on their own time and built cars on their own time, and they assembled 13 cars, and this was one of the 13 that they assembled. And if you were to compare each Tucker side by side, you're going to find several differences. And the reason for that is because each one of them were a pilot production car. They were making changes as they went. Now, Tucker is well known for the headlight in the center, which some people kind of laugh about, but that Cyclops headlight, the idea was safety. It would light the corner around as you drove at night. You turn your steering wheel, and it would turn with your steering wheel and light the corner long before you ever got there. Today, that's something that Lexus and a few other cars are offering. The other thing that the Tucker is very well known for is it has the first safety pop-out windshield, has the first padded dash and side panels all the way around. Tucker had the patent for the collapsible steering column. He had the roof with no drip edge that's visible. It's cut up into the roof line. It's something that Cadillac came out in the mid-50s and thought it was a big deal. This car also has the engine in the rear. It's a helicopter engine mounted in the rear. It's a Franklin engine, and so up here is all trunk space up in the front. This car easily would travel 120 miles an hour back in 1948. Well, the Tucker is designed with that safety chamber, and the idea was that there was all that open space, and in a crash that would protect you from anything. You know, you don't have steel to slam into, or even the door handles. You know, this is how you get in and out of the car. Everything was very smooth, very safety conscious. That's what Preston Tucker's idea was with the car. This is our Packard collection. Actually, it's a very small portion of our Packard collection. We have several, but a lot of them aren't on display right now because we simply don't have the room. Over here we have our early brass era cars. Over here we have the cars that you think of the gangster areas in 1930. 1948 I think is interesting, the body style on it. Packard actually has quite an interesting history itself. Packard actually was a family-owned hardware and lumber company that supplied lumber and timbers for the railroad industry, and a lot of the railroad ties in the early railroads were Packard railroad ties. And later, the two Packard brothers started making light bulbs. And Packard out of Ohio, one of the brothers actually went and bought a Winton car, and had a lot of problems with it, kept taking that car back to the factory and telling the factory, gee, if you would do this or if you'd fix that, it would be a better car, it would run better, you'd have less problems. And at one point, the owner of Winton told one of the Packard brothers, if you think you can do a better job, make your own car. And in 1899, they built their very first Packard. So that's how we have Packards. From light bulbs and railroad ties to a luxury car that spanned clear up into the 50s when it merged with Studebaker. We're going to go on upstairs and see our Century Ford exhibit that's up here. Note the staircase. How many barns have you seen with a staircase quite like this? This one actually came out of a house in downtown Kalamazoo, and when they were tearing the building down, Donald Gilmore decided that he'd ask about the staircase, and so that's why we got this very ornate Victorian staircase in this barn. Now, of course, the barn's in 1897. Like I said before, it was used for storing spearmint, for regular spearmint gum, and when you come on upstairs here, you'll see what I mean, how huge it is. And as you can see, it's quite large in here, so you could have had a lot of spearmint up in this barn. This barn is where we have the Century Ford exhibit hosted. So the first Ford that we have, it has to be a 1903. 1903, very rare car. Back seat on the Ford, a little different than what you anticipate today. It's kind of shaped like the old Victorian couches, and the only way to get into it is from the very rear. Well, this is our 1911 Model T Racer. And as you can see, it has a seat here and a safety strap that you could hold on to. This, I assume, would be for your navigator and your pit crew. That's 1911. A lot of the early car manufacturers, to get publicity, wanted their cars in races to show how how well they maintained and how far they could go endurance-wise. Here's the Model T, 1921. Model T is the car that got into mass production, and one of the things that Henry Ford did once he got into mass production is he offered his cars in any color you wanted, as long as it was black. Well, of course, that sped it up. He could make all his cars down the line the same exact color. Then in the back, we have a Model A. It's a 1928 Model A Doctor's Coupe. Actually, it was Ford that really did get the masses in this era on the road. And then, of course, we have the V8, very popular Ford V8. And this car is interesting because it's got bird's eye maple. It's a woody wagon, and a lot of these were used by police departments as paddy wagons and chase vehicles. In fact, early promotional pieces for Ford from this time period talked about using them as police vehicles, and they used testimonials from police officers and chief of police from all over the place. They said the only problem they had is when they had to chase another Ford V8. Well, our Ford exhibit enters into the 50s here. In the very back corner we have a 51 Ford. Here we have a 55 Crown Victoria. And of course the T-Bird. Everybody's very familiar with the T-Bird, which had actually a retractable top that you took off. It was a hard top to make this into a convertible. Extremely popular car today. In fact, the new Thunderbird has tried to adopt the same styling. And this car over here is very interesting, the 59 Ford Galaxy. It's retractable. This car actually came standard this way. It's a convertible. And this metal top drops down into what would typically be the trunk in another vehicle. And then it would close down and it would look like a four-door convertible, but people would be wondering where the top was at. It would drop down in there. From what I understand, there was like 300 different relays that operated that top to make it work successfully. And of course, with anything mechanical, they don't always work successfully. And I've heard stories of several people getting their golf clubs trapped in the back of there. This car actually has air conditioning on it, so it's pretty rare. But this is kind of what you think of when you think of the 50s. Are these cars, these color combinations, very popular. This is the Edsel, very famous for being a huge flop. Kind of like when you think of Coke changing their flavor. That's kind of what happened with the Edsel. Built a lot of them, but they weren't very popular. This one actually has push-button transmission on the steering column, where you just push the gear that you want to go into. And they weren't the most eye-appealing or desirable car, but what's sad is 1960 models actually looked quite sharp. Well, of course, no Ford exhibit would be complete without the Mustang, and here's a 1964 and a half Mustang. And always a controversy. People don't believe they made a 1964 and a half. They always think it was a 1965, but here it is indeed. Lee Iacocca design. You'll know that Lee Iacocca eventually went to Chrysler Corporation, where the minivan pretty much saved the company. Well, behind me here is another good shot of the Companion Barn. That's 1897, and that was the one used for Spearmint. That's where we saw the Tucker and the Packards, and upstairs was the Ford exhibit. But now we're coming over to the Classic Car Club of America's museum, and they're adding a big addition on the back. And as you can see, we have a lot of grass, a lot of ground out here. We have 90 acres, so there's no problem parking if you want to bring a motorhome or minivan or a car or even a car trailer loaded with your antique car. Bring it on out. Well, inside the Classic Car Club of America museum here, the very first thing you're going to walk up to is this drafting board. And this drafting board belonged to Raymond Dietrich, and Raymond Dietrich was a very well-known designer during the Classic era. The Classic era would be 1925 to 1948. These typically were the cars that were high dollar cars in their day, usually custom built. A few things to point out to you that you'll see here is the hood ornaments and mascots. That's the other half of the collection that we have here at the museum. We have a nice V16 Cadillac engine on display that just came in, and we'll take you around and show you some of the cars. Well, the first car we see down here is a 1947 Cadillac Fastback. It's got that streamlined design to it. The thing that's interesting about this car, it's a completely unrestored original car. Now, when you think of this time period in history, that's right after World War II, and so basically the 1947 looks like a 1941 or 42 with just a slight facelift, because all the car manufacturers were busy making armaments, making tanks, airplane engines, whatever. Now the next car here is a 1934 Airflow. A lot of people look at this and they think of the Volkswagen Beetle, but This car is an ultra streamline. This is one of the first cars that actually used the wind tunnel in its design. It's a very interesting, very neat car, but much like the Edsel, was a financial flop for Chrysler Corporation. 1930 Packard. This is kind of the body styling that most people look at and they think of the gangster era. You know, Road to Perdition, they think of 1930 Packard. Back here we have 1938. It actually carries the LeBaron, or actually the Dietrich name on it, even though Raymond Dietrich no longer worked for Murphy Body Company when they put that out. Well, this car here is probably the crown jewel of the Gilmore Car Museum collection. It's our 1929 Duesenberg J. It's a dual cowl phaeton, and this is number 111. This car was actually built for the New York Auto Show 1929, and after the New York Auto Show, it was moved to LA for the Los Angeles Auto Show. And this particular vehicle was used in the Hollywood, LA area as a demonstrator. So most of the Hollywood stars that ended up buying Duesenbergs, this was the car that they got their sample ride in, and this is the sample that they actually saw to make up their mind. Now this car, 1929, is the same year of the stock market crash, but this car here cost, when it was new, about $9,000 for the chassis, which would have been the engine, running board, front grille, and another $9,000 to $10,000 just for body work, for the custom body work. Now this one's a LeBaron, so that means the custom body work was done by LeBaron. So in 1929, this car cost nearly $20,000. The same time that a Model A would cost you $450 to $500. So you can do the math real quick and figure out how many Model A's you could have bought for the same price of a Duesenberg. Now the one thing you have to keep in mind is the Great Depression really hurt the luxury market, and most of the cars in the classic Car Club of America Museum here are what they would consider luxury cars. Limited production, high quality cars of their day. But the Great Depression really hurt it, and it wasn't that people couldn't afford to purchase the car, it's they really couldn't afford the reputation they'd have driving past some poor soul that's out of work, living in a tent city or selling apples. So in 1947, this car was considered just a big old boat, and it sold at a used car lot for $123. Pretty amazing. Well, now we're upstairs in the Classic Car Club America Museum's barn here at the Gilmore Car Museum, and you see just a wonderful collection of classics. The Lincoln, the very interesting 1937 Cord, Studebaker President. Some wonderful cars up here. Now you may have occasionally heard a hammer as we were talking and as we were walking around upstairs, maybe downstairs. What we're doing is we're building a lot of additions this year. The Gilmore Car Museum has more space outside than we do inside. So why don't we come out here and I'll show you the new addition. Well, as you can see, here's the brand new addition to the Classic Car Club of America Museum. It's about 6,500 square feet, so it doubles the size of their current building here on the grounds, and it's octagon shaped, so it'll hold about 16 more cars on display, plus they've added to their library. Look on over here and you'll see more. The Gilmore Car Museum is constantly growing, and you'll see out here where the orange ribbons are at. We've got steel already set up, and that's for the Pierce Arrow Society's museum. They currently are running one of our barns, but they'll be moving out here in a new building. And a little farther out there by the trees, you can see another pile of steel, and that's for another building. This year alone, we're adding 21,000 square feet, 3 buildings, to the Gilmore Car Museum. Well, here's our 1950 London transport bus used in the streets of London. We actually use it out here on our streets during the weekends when we have big car shows. We take that bus out and around and give people a ride out to the back 40. Now remember, we're on 90 acres. We've only seen half the museum. We've got 3 more barns back here to do. So hop in, let's go for a ride. Well, this is our back storage area. Like I've said before, we have more cars than we have actually space to display them right now, so that's why we're building the additions. But this is where we store some of the stuff that we actually occasionally get out and use for other things. Some of them are loaner cars, but you'll find some pretty interesting stuff back here that's not on the tour. Thompson Flyer, another Duesenberg. Right next to you is a Ferrari. 1989 Jaguar Ferrari over here. Well, this is down by our muscle cars, sports cars. This is what we call U-barn. It was originally built just as a utility barn, but now we're using it for display space. So here's where all our power is at, the sports cars. You'll notice in this barn we have a lot of child's pedal cars. Actually, we have about 75 of them throughout this building. These are all from one collection. They're all restored. They're part of the John Stedman collection. And when he passed away, his family thought they'd pass on his passion for children's pedal cars onto the Gilmore Car Museum. So now we have them here on exhibit. Now, even though this is kind of small looking, this is definitely not a child's pedal car. This is A.J. Foyt's Indy 500 car. And you'll see it says Gilmore Foyt Race Team. And actually it was the Jim Gilmore team. He was a nephew of Donald Gilmore. And this was one of their race cars. This is actually one of the backup cars that they would have used at several different races. So it's an authentic Indy race car that's on loan to us from Gilmore Enterprises. We're just going to walk around and I'll kind of give you some highlights of some of the cars here. This gorgeous 1935 Ford V8 here has a really interesting story. This car was purchased new in Grand Haven, Michigan, and after the gentleman that had it owned it for a handful of years, I think he had it for 20 years, he sold it to a young kid that was in high school. And that young man has owned that car until today. So 1955 to today is the second owner of the vehicle, and he has kept this thing in immaculate condition. It's got 20,000 original miles on that car, and it's never been driven any further than 75 miles in one trip. Now this car here is a 1980 BMW M1. What's really interesting about this car is it's a show car. It was designed for the European show circuit, and it traveled all over Europe to different shows, and that's why it has the paint job it has. But this Kevlar car moves very fast, but it's a Kevlar body. Same material they use for bulletproof vests. 1965 Excalibur was originally purchased by the TV and movie star Tony Curtis. And of course, talking about movies, Back to the Future. And this is a 1981 DeLorean that most people recognize from the Back to the Future trilogy. And that's where that car, I guess, became famous. Very neat car. It's stainless steel body over or skin over a fiberglass body. Then we have the Fiero, 1984 Fiero, and this one is an Indy pace car. 1969 Chevy Corvair. This one here is actually a very low mileage car. It's been in the museum collection for a number of years, but this is the car that Ralph Nader said was unsafe at any speed and pretty much killed it. Now with the Cadillac Eldorado, we're talking fins. You can see the gigantic fins in this 59 Caddy. The 58 had a little less of a fin. And of course we have another one of our Mustangs, 67 Mustang Convertible. An American icon, the Corvette. This one here is a 1954. 1953 was the very first year of Corvette. And with Corvette, the very first year you could only get it in white, just like with the Model T. You could get it any color you'd like as long as it was black. 1953 Corvette was only available in white. Now, in 1953 and 1954, they only offered a 6-cylinder. It wasn't until 1955, this model, when they offered a larger engine. 57 here has a nice V8 in it. And then back here we have a 1962 Corvette. The Camaro, this is a 2002 Camaro, and it's the very last Camaro built that was sold by General Motors. Now, actually, General Motors, the very last one they kept, and it will be in their museum at some point. These are the muscle cars. These down through this area, the muscle cars that everybody's so fond of. The 442 Olds, Buick Riviera. Actually, Riviera was kind of a little sports car that was designed for the person that had a little bit more money. That's what they were gearing towards. Of course, another one of the Mustangs, a very popular car. This is a fastback. And then a AMX two-door. Now this one is a 1970. Don't see a whole lot of those around. Of course, now we have the Cuda and the Dodge Charger. Then you're coming up to a Challenger RT 1970 and the Roadrunner 1974 Plymouth. Well, we've seen everything out here. Now we just have 2 more barns to go. And up here, we have all our brass era cars, all the early stuff. Well, this here is a 1909 high wheeler. And this one, you can tell just by looking at it, it's definitely designed as a buggy. It's got the leather fenders, tiller steering. What amazes me, this is a 1909. This is for the guy that did not want to give up his buggy. He must have figured the horseless carriage or the automobile was a passing fad. Well, this car has a huge chain-driven drive and quite a small, lightweight axle on it. Big rubber tires on this high wheeler. This person is definitely behind the times. Didn't want to catch on with that newfangled technology called the automobile. Well, here's a 1910 Model T. Obviously seats more people. This car was the one that's designed to last. Now this one here is a 1906 Ford, so you can see a huge difference. The Model T in the early days, you could get it in different colors, but as we noted before, to get mass production, it was only offered in black. But compare this car, the 1910 Model T by Ford, to the 1909 Holzman down there that looks like a buggy. Amazing styling contrast. Right here we have a 1918 Chevrolet, and that's on loan to us from a local Chevy dealer. This one here is a 1904 Auto Car, and this has the tiller steering. It's quite an interesting method. This is a little different. Tiller steering gives you a little bit more room for your belly. And then this car I find is a very interesting car. It's a 1910 Lozier, and it's a large brass era car. And this one's painted red, white, and blue. And if you can see underneath the fenders, they're all painted red underneath. This little 2-cycle engine is actually on a 1919 Johnson motor wheel. It was manufactured in South Bend, Indiana. And what they would do is they would mount this motor onto an ordinary boy's bicycle. And this bicycle is actually a Yale bicycle made by Yale Sewing Machine Company. Kind of make a ultra fast, ultra lightweight motor vehicle, or 1919 style motorcycle, maybe. Economical motorcycle at that. This here is a very rare 1915 Woods Mobilette. It's considered a cycle car. You can see how the seats are offset and very, very close. This car in 1915 sold new for $317 with all the accessories you see. Now you're probably looking at it wondering what accessories are on it, but for an extra $8, they got a headlight and a tank, and for an extra $10, they added a brake. So there you have it, the 1915 Woods Mobilette. Here's a 1919 Stutz, and we're here in the T-barn. This was originally, barn was used for storage, but today we use it for display. Well, right here in front of you is a 1910 Hutmobile, but I want you to take a look at something. This is a 1903 Cadillac. The red one back here, very similar to the 1903 Ford. The reason that is that Ford was involved with Cadillac before he was fired. So that's a 1903, very similar to the Ford. But then you look at this here. This is a little buckboard, and it looks like a little buggy, a little buckboard. And this one here has a little tiny engine in the back, and it's a 1906. Yet it looks so far behind times. When you look at this one, it's a 1905, and this has an air-cooled engine. That's a Franklin. So you can see there was kind of this challenge going on whether people wanted to accept the fact that the car was here to stay. One over here we have our 1910 Cadillac. Now our 1912 Cadillac had everything electric on it, electric start, electric lights. This one still has acetylene and kerosene lights and a crank in the front. But what's really amazing to me with some of these early brass era cars, like this one here, is a 1903 Stevens Duray with a nice little convertible seat. What's interesting to me is you look at a 1903 like this one, or the little buggy over there. All these early cars that look just like a buggy, those were truly the horseless carriages. It makes you wonder if those people anticipated this was a passing fad, where the person that was driving the 1904 Cadillac or the Brush over there maybe anticipated it was a technology that was here to stay. Well, Jim, it's been great giving you a tour. I hope you've really enjoyed yourself. Now, next time you come out, plan a little extra time because it usually takes 2 to 3 hours to go through the museum, and I know we've kind of scurried through. And check the website, and you'll be able to see what our current hours are and all the costs and everything. We'd love to have you guys come up again. See ya.